Sigmund Freud is a 19th century philosopher, born in 19th century, lived up to 20th century. So most people would know some basic concepts about Freud. Even if you are not a student of psychology, you have not learnt his theories, you are relatively familiar with some of the terms. Obviously, you are aware of psychoanalysis, the school of thought that is created by Freud. So people are very familiar with concepts like unconscious, fixation, defense mechanism, Freudian slip, dream symbolism, and so on. Now we shall look at briefly how Freud is a positivist thinker, again from the positivism understood in collecting data and working on that, interpreting that, and coming up with your own theory. So some of the major ideas that Freud proposed we'll try to look at. In fact, Freud was greatly influenced by his close friend and colleague, Joseph Breuer. Now, he had a lot of conversation with Joseph Breuer about a particular case history, and for the sake of anonymity, and that person's name is given as Anna O. Now, she was a patient of Breuer. Freud himself was a medical doctor, and Breuer also. And she was suffering from blurred vision, hallucination, and even partial paralysis. And it is because of seeking help she was frequenting Breuer. And all that Breuer did was let her talk to him about her experience and then listen to her patiently. Now, the more and more she was engaging in a conversation with Breuer, the less and less the symptoms showed up. She was feeling better. She had less of hallucination, she had less of blurred vision. So she herself referred to that as talking cure. Now, Breuer has discussed this particular case with Freud, though Freud has never met her even once, but he knew through and through about this case, because it is based on this case that both of them collaborated in getting a book published in 1895 titled Studies in Hysteria. But the way in which they both approached the issue, made them drift apart from each other, Freud and Breuer. In fact, it ended up their professional relationship, and even to some extent it has strained their personal relationship. Now, Freud associated the origin of hysteria to her childhood experience. Now, based on his own understanding of human personality, particularly the influence that, the way some of the unconscious things that may have in our personality, Freud concluded that hysteria of Anna O was a result of her childhood sexual abuse, which obviously Breuer did not share this opinion. It's not that she said about it, it's all the inference that Freud had concluded from the different conversation that Breuer had with her, because he had access to that as they were working on that project. Now that explains Freud's theory in very many ways. Freud attributes what we are today to our childhood experiences, and oftentimes links it with a certain sexual component of our childhood experience. So from this, Freud draws some kind of psychoanalytic theory where he states all psychic energy is generated by the libido. Libido is, can be roughly translated as the drive, but often it is a pleasure drive or even a sexual drive. Now, Freud thinks that our mental states are influenced by two competing forces. That is why Freud is considered as a philosopher of mind. He focuses on the human mind. And these two competing forces, he calls them cathexis and anti-cathexis. So those of you who are not familiar with this term, I spell the word cathexis, C-A-T-H-E-X-I-S, and anti-cathexis. You just need to add A-N-T-I before the word cathexis. Now, what is cathexis? It is the investment of mental energy in a person or an idea or an object. Now, for example, if you are starving, so you tend to create a mental image on a delicious meal. So now your mental energy is invested in a particular object. In this case, it is meal. So sometimes if you are longing for some kind of affection, then obviously your mental energy will be invested in a person from whom you are longing for that affection. Or if you are stuck with your own projects and you are struggling to complete your project, obviously your mental energy is invested in that idea. So it could be the mental cathexis is basically the investment of your mental energy in a person, in an idea or an object. Now there is a way in which you have this mental energy invested in any of this, either object or person or an idea, but this energy therefore seeks out activities that are related to the desire in order to disperse some of the excess energy from what he calls the id. Now, id, I will come back to that. Some of you are familiar with that. Id is that basic drive within us, which is not very rational. Now, if you can't actually seek out food to appease your hunger, what you might do is instead thumb through your cookbook or browse your favorite recipe blog. So this is what you are diverting you are seeking out activities that are related to the desire, because there is some excess of energy which is there. Or if you are not getting affection from a person, you might end up looking at reading some stories about romance, or watching a film about romance, or whatever that might be, or affection. Anti-cathexis involves the ego, which blocks the socially unacceptable needs of the id. Now, suppose your mental energy is invested with an object, but probably it is unacceptable socially. Getting that object is unacceptable socially. Or in a person, and therefore it probably that is not socially unacceptable. What you do is you tend to repress those urges and those desires, and that is the common form of anti-cathexis. But note, you also need significant investment of energy while you are repressing your urges. So your energy is not only when you crave for something, when you long for something, but also your energy is invested when you want to repress those urges which are socially unacceptable. And Freud thinks there is only a limited libidinal energy that is available. So when you are investing most of your energy in suppressing urges through this process of what he calls anti-cathexis, you have less energy available for other processes. Now, oftentimes you must have heard it, whether you are a student of psychology or not. Don't spend too much of energy in negativity, then you can hardly produce anything positively. So now the repression is one way in which your energy is used negatively, and therefore you are not able to actually invest your energy for something that is more productive. Freud also believed that our behavior, human behavior, are motivated by two driving instincts: the life instincts and the death instinct. Now, what is the life instinct? Obviously, the life instinct is not only the human being, but it's also in some ways in other species, the basic instinct to survive and also to reproduce and also to have pleasure. So therefore, these are the instincts that enable us to look out for food, shelter, even affection or love, and even sex. So he suggested that at the same time, while we have life instinct, there is also death instinct, which is often unconscious. So this unconscious wish for death is what he refers to as death instinct. Well, we may have disagreements with this, whether everybody would have or what proportion people would have. One expression of this death drive or the death instinct is certain self-destructive behavior. Now note, when Freud speaks about self-destructive behavior, he is not only speaking about self-destruction in the physical sense. It's not like you are inflicting pain on yourself physically. It could be otherwise as well. So Freud puts that self-destruction in a larger category. It's a drive that we have. Oftentimes it is unconscious. You may not be, when he says unconscious, it is not, you are not consciously aware of it. It doesn't show forth in your consciousness. However, Freud thinks this death instinct is often kind of moderated by life instincts. So death instincts, they don't have, it's not let loose completely. There's a life instinct that tries to temper it time and again. So these are the two motivating factors for behavior. So suppose if you notice somebody behaving in a way that is ruining his own life, what is happening according to Freud is ruining life. Again, I don't mean in the literally physical sense, not does Freud mean that way. So what is happening is there is that unconscious death drive that is coming to the fore. And that is why the person is ruining his or her life. So that is part of what is in your death drive. Now let us come back to his understanding of psyche. Of course, the word psyche is typically, this is used in philosophy ages, but oftentimes it is also referred to as the human mind. So the human mind is structured into two main parts, which I have already explained to some extent: the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. Now, the conscious mind includes all the things that we can easily bring to our awareness. Unconscious mind, on the other hand, includes things that are outside of our awareness. So Freud thinks there are desires, wishes, urges, and hopes, even sometimes memories that lie outside of our awareness, yet continue to influence our behavior. You may not be aware that you have this desire. You may not be aware of a particular memory of the past. It is somehow buried in your unconscious, deep down. Some experience that happened long ago. You may not be consciously aware of it, but it somehow influences your behavior. And sometimes we may have our own urges, our own desires, and so on. So it involves so many dimensions than conscious. So mind is like an iceberg for Freud. So what is visible is only the tip of the iceberg. So that represents, or the visible tip represents only the tiny portion of the mind, which is obviously the conscious part, which we are aware of. And in fact, there is a huge expansion of the ice hidden beneath, which is underneath the water. This constitutes your unconscious. In fact, much of our mind is unconscious. So if you get to understand the unconscious, you may be able to understand the human person better, or the human behavior better. Oftentimes we are stuck with the conscious, and therefore we don't really fully get to know or understand the human mind. Based on these divisions of his mind, the personality itself of the human, Freud divides into three major components. This is something that everybody commonly knows, whether you are a student of psychology or not. Id, ego, and superego. Now, anyway, let me briefly explain about these things, even if you are in the know of these things. Id is the most primitive part of our personality. Why it is a primitive part? Because that is the source of our most basic urges. But ironically, this part of personality is totally unconscious. But at the same time, it serves as the source of all libidinal energy. So all your libidinal energy, is stemming from entirely unconscious. Well, today modern psychologists and psychoanalytic theories dispute this idea. Freud has given too much of importance to unconscious, but nevertheless, at that time when Freud suggested this was mind-blowing idea, completely new, because people thought we are a conscious human beings, very rational about our behavior. This is a big challenge, particularly in the post-enlightenment era. So Freud has challenged us powerfully, because that is the most primitive part, because that is from where we get all our urges, but it is entirely unconscious. So all our urges are to be found not so much in our conscious thinking, not in our rational ways of understanding, but it is in the unconscious. It raises a serious challenge, obviously, to the question of knowledge as well. What is ego? Ego is that aspect of personality that helps you to deal with reality, all that happens around you, and it also helps you to ensure that the demands of the id are satisfied in socially acceptable or more realistic way. Because there is, as id is unconscious, these desires doesn't have any kind of limit. It can have all kind of unrealistic desires. It's like a fairy tale desire, and sometimes it can be shocking desire. And what it does is it meets the demand of the id, trying to satisfy the urges that stem from the id, but channelizing it in a socially acceptable way. But superego is that part of the personality which tries to, impose a certain values onto your ego, because where you are, the ego, when it is trying to meet the demands of the id, tries to do it in a socially acceptable way, but what is socially acceptable is given to the ego by the superego, because it gives some moral values, moral standards that normally the society has given us. The society includes our own families, our own social circles in which we are associated. So that is basically superego, because that is the internalized aspect, because we inherit many things from the society about certain moral principles and values, and the superego is that internalized aspect of that, which obviously is the guiding one for the ego to ensure the demands of the id are met in a socially acceptable way. So based on this understanding of human mind and the human personality, Freud thinks that humans' development has to be traced back to childhood. And this development he calls as not simply a psychic development, but he terms precisely as psychosexual development, because at the heart of it, it is the drive is primarily a sexual drive for him. So, and it begins at the time of your childhood. You remember that is where he and Breyer had a fallout. Now Freud thinks of 5 stages of psychosexual development. Some of them are pretty exaggerated, but nevertheless, it's better we know that. We may not be in full agreement with that today. many are strongly criticizing Freud of reducing the psychosexual development in a very, very narrow way. Each stage, in any case, the libido's pleasure-seeking energy is focused on different parts of the body. Now, Freud came to this conclusion with some clinical research. It's not that Freud is sitting and reflecting, and that is why it is based on some data he has. But obviously, people would say, they will raise questions about the credentials of the data and of the interpretation and so on. The 5 stages of psychosexual development are the oral stage. The libidinal energy is focused on the mouth, that is why it is oral. The anal stage, the libidinal energies are focused on the anus. The phallic stage, the libidinal energies are focused on the sexual organ. Then he also calls the latent stage. It's a period of calm in which little libidinal interest is present. That is why he calls it as latent stage. The genital stage, now the libidinal energies are focused on the genitals. Now there is a kind of confusion here because he speaks about the phallic stage and here the genital stage. The phallic stage is typically focused on the phallus, whereas the genital stage involves all other genitals. So now I am not expert in these different stages honestly, but if you are a psychologist during the discussion we could take that up. I for one find this a bit too narrow personally. We'll just take it up for the discussion later. Now the successful completion of each stage is important for you to have a healthy development as an adult. If there is a conflict that is resolved in a particular stage, so what Freud calls you are fixated or stuck in that particular point of time. Again, this is very commonly used in our own conversation. That's very Freudian. Unaware, we use a lot of Freudian language in our conversation. You are fixated on that. Basically what we are saying is you are not grown out of that particular stage where you got fixated. So a fixation can involve an over-dependence or an obsession with a particular phase of development. So a person, for example, in the oral fixation is simply stuck with the very oral stage of development. People do say, it's very interesting, again, it's a matter of dispute. People who are smoking, for example, or if they are found biting fingernails, or even overeating, the abusive way of eating. If you are a Freudian, immediately you would say you are fixated in the oral stage. It's oral fixation. Okay, there is a pressure on the mouth. There you are completely fixated. Now, again, this is a matter of dispute. But nevertheless, it's an interesting point. Now, now let us move to the question of dreams in Freud, because the dreams in Freud is what has, what has inspired many people, including many philosophers. For example, Ricker has taken the symbolism involved in dreams very seriously in developing his own theory of hermeneutics. We will not be discussing him, but it's nevertheless important for us to know. So his dream analysis is quite interesting. But we should not forget, applying Freud himself for his own theories. We can say we cannot forget his background. Freud was born in the Czech Republic, but born of Jewish parents. Now, if you notice, the Jewish literature is filled with dreams and the symbolism associated with the dreams. So, partly Freud, one can see, has an influence from that Jewish background as part of the dream. But of course, he is trying to give a certain understanding of it from the modern point of view using psychoanalysis. So, in order to understand the dream analysis, we have to get back to the question of unconscious mind. Because he thought dreams is one of the key ways to peek into what lies outside of our consciousness. In other words, dream is nothing but a royal road to the unconscious. The dream is leading you to the unconscious. So if you examine the dreams carefully, you can know how the unconscious mind works, but you also at the same time can know what the unconscious is trying to hide from the conscious awareness. So you know how it works, but also what it is hiding from the consciousness. So the content of the dream for him can be broken down into two different types. One is the manifest content of the dream. So the manifest content of the dream is when you wake up, what do you remember? You do remember certain, it may not be completely coherent, but definitely you remember certain images or certain thoughts, even certain events associated with the dream. Now, this is the manifest content. So while you are awake, you remember this. The latent content is the hidden meanings which are often symbolically given within the dream. So when you have certain image, it may not necessarily correspond to a particular thing in itself, but it may have a symbolic meaning attached to that. Now that is hidden within the dream. Freud thought we have a lot of unfulfilled wish. So in order to have this experience of wish fulfillment, dreams become an essential form. By taking the unconscious thoughts, feelings and desires, the dreams transform them into less threatening forms. And the role, what exactly dream is doing is, it reduces the ego's anxiety. See, you may not be probably think consciously, I mean, first of all, it's not given to your consciousness, but you may not be able to, the drive of the id cannot be expressed otherwise, because the ego gets anxious about it, because the ego has the charge of the id, to somehow give expression to its desires in the socially acceptable way, in the realistic way. Now, in dreams, it is a fantasy, it's a wild, anything can happen in dream, because obviously there is no anxiety of the ego, and the unconscious is exactly doing that by using the dreams, by reducing the anxiety of the ego. This is about the dream analysis. So Freud would have, you might have heard many of the things. If you have a dream about a snake, that means you have got a wish fulfillment of sexuality that is manifested, and things of that type. Again, this is very banal, it seems to me. I mean, but at the same time, again, it seems too narrow. We cannot, have such a very narrow understanding. But again, we will come back to that during discussion. Another important concept that we are aware of while discussing Freud, which I think is, quite popular, but also acceptable, is the term he uses called defense mechanism. Defense mechanism is basically, when people are unwilling to accept a painful truth, they tend to look for a very logical explanation. You are trying to rationalize. Basically what you are doing is you are in denial that this exists. So you are trying to look for alternative ways of explaining it away. This he calls the defense mechanism. Oftentimes it is associated, suppose somebody says something about us, we try to kind of rationalize it and say, but it can also not about our own personality, but it could be about an event, for example. So defense mechanism can come not only when we are critiqued or when fingers are pointed at us, but it can be also in other ways. Now there are different kinds of defense mechanism or tactics. This defense mechanism has a purpose. It protects the ego from its anxiety. So denial is obviously one defense mechanism. You just deny it. It doesn't exist. This is not a problem. Repression is another defense mechanism. People sometimes repress their urges, their desires, their wishes. That's another way in which the ego is trying to protect itself from anxiety. There are many other things that, I'm just giving a couple of examples. Now, Freud's theory has been greatly criticized, but we cannot dismiss his contribution to psychology. Particularly, his work has created a major change in the way we look at human mind, and also the way we try to understand the problems we may have in mind, what we call the mental illness. And there is definitely a correlation between our psyche and our physique. In other words, the psychological issues do have impact on our physiology. So that is something today generally people have learned to accept. But remember, Freud was not living at a time when we had this highly developed neuroscience and Freud. I mean, there was neuroscience which existed, but it was not in the way that today it has been. It has been growing enormously in the past couple of decades. So Freud really thought the mental problems can be resolved by actually talking about them. And that is the way in which he revolutionized the psychotherapy. Many contemporary psychologists, I told you, they do not today give importance to some of the ideas of Freud's, but the theories remain important. To understand where psychology is today, it is essential to take a look back at where it has been and how it got here. So Freud's work definitely provides an insight into an important movement in psychology and help transform how we think about mental health and how we approach psychological disorders. By studying these theories, we can gain a better understanding of a certain history, many terms such as defense mechanism, Freudian slip, became part of our everyday language. Now, Freudian slip, again, you know that, you really have something in mind, but you don't want to express it, but it automatically falls out of your mouth. So, it's called the Freudian slip. By learning about his work and theories, we can understand how these ideas and concepts are now deeply woven into our popular life. So, this is not something Freud, one of the great things about Freud is that he has made his thinking part of our everyday life and the language that we use. But definitely Freud has challenged some of the taken for granted ideas of his time, namely that all that we are humans are rational. I mean, the whole idea of the modernity claims about our rationality, all that we undertake is done consciously. And Freud has shown that we are wrong. Whether the details of it we may agree or disagree, that is another point, but definitely we are wrong. There is a lot of things that are not rational in our life and a lot of things that cannot be explained by the conscious awareness that we have about something, and we are not master of our own ego. That is the greatest contribution that Freud has made. People like Descartes thought we are master of our own selves. No, we are not. So that is definitely something that Freud has contributed to us, philosophy as well as psychology as a separate discipline. The last point I would like to pay your attention is Freud is also very critical about religion, because again we have to take it with a pinch of salt. Freud is analyzing religion within the lab, so he is not analyzing religion in its entirety, but within the lab. Now, the way in which Freud understood religion is, again, it has to be related to the child's relation to its father. For Freud, the child has an ambivalent relation to the father. So you know part of this from the question of Oedipus complex, right? The child's relation to the father is what normally our ambivalent relationship to the nature, because our relationship to the nature is also ambivalent insofar as we have this experience of nature that nourishes us, but also the experience of the nature that threatens us. We do know about the flood, we do know about the tsunami. So, but at the same time, it is the nature that is providing. It's exactly the same with father. The father is the one who provides me, but the father is the one who frightens me as well. You see? So now what you have been thinking is, this ambivalent relationship to the father. At one point in time, you are when you are growing as an adult, you realize your father is not all that powerful as you wish him to be. So there are certain insecurities of life he is not able to help you to cope with. So then you have a tendency to project the wish fulfillment, basically, that your father is there to protect you. And what you do is obviously to project to an invisible father, whom you may call God, somebody who helps you to deal with the insecurities of life. So religion, therefore, bears a resemblance of obsessive neurosis, because religious thinking for him is compulsive and its ceremonies are neurotic. So basically it is infantile wish fulfillment in a personal level. So it is therefore an obstacle to your freedom and growth, because it doesn't help you to understand there is a compulsive obsession here. It is merely a kind of wish fulfillment of seeking security in an invisible father, which as a child you have been seeking. More of that again we can take up in discussion, which I think has a valid point, because at least the way sometimes people live out religion seems to be that. It is when there is a trouble, you immediately think of God. It is not otherwise. So, well, I'm not saying that maybe the experience with everybody, but there is something of Freud that we can definitely take it seriously and reflect on it, whether we are religious people or not. There's nothing wrong in taking a criticism and trying to introspect ourselves. We don't need to become very defensive about it. I think I would conclude with that. The idea of Freud. Most of the other things we will take up during our discussion. There may be many interesting questions that may be there. Though we may not be able to accept Freud for every detail of it, what is important for us to remember is Freud has challenged the way we have been thinking about the human mind. And Freud has based his argument not by some speculative abstract thinking, but by some concrete experience as a professional medical doctor. So with some data that people who has been working with, and that is why we group him with this positive school of thought. And Freud has influenced many generations successively in philosophy as well as in psychoanalysis, and they are vital today for us. Thank you.